Chapter 1039. Outside the border area surrounded by the present zone, it was still below the deep zone, far in the deepest part of the withering zone. Here, even the surging of the deep tide could be clearly sensed. Even though he had become blind, on the strange sampan, Hades could still sense the turbulent undercurrent outside, as well as the terrifying power brewing from the deepest part of the abyss, the lowest level of hell. We're almost there. The black-robed man who was rowing the oar spoke with a hoarse voice. When the layers of dark fog were blown away by the undercurrent, what was revealed in front of the tiny sampan was a terrifying world so vast that it seemed to fill the entire abyss. The hell of hell. After penetrating through the 16th level, it was the supreme palace that was forged into one by endless time. The withered king's territory was where the fallen kingdom was located. At this moment, under the rainbow light of the hell body, there were countless legions advancing towards the present zone along the path at every moment. The large group of gray and black that gathered in one place was like the blood flowing in the veins. It rose bit by bit, until one day, the entire present zone was completely covered by it. A large hand formed by pale bones reached out from the deepest part of the darkness and grabbed the tiny sampan. But when the 5 fingers spread out again, Hades appeared in the deepest part of the palace from outside the fallen kingdom, under the cold and solemn door. Behind him was the endless staircase formed by the stairs for an audience. Is this an exception for a disabled person like me? Hades flicked the dust off his sleeves, as if mocking him, and right in front of him, the jester who was waiting there had a gloomy expression. He glanced at him with a displeased expression. "You're late." "That's true, but I still came, didn't I?" Hades looked at the door beside him with his empty eye sockets, as if he could see the eerie and strange existence behind the endless darkness. "I came to receive my punishment. You have to understand that your incompetence has brought great losses to His Majesty and us." The jester said, "The consequences that await you will not be good." "I know." Hades nodded and said nothing more. After a moment of silence, the ceremonial officer guarding the door did not step aside. Instead, he pointed to the side and said, "Since it's already late, there's no harm in waiting a little longer." He paused for a moment and glanced at the huge shadow creeping up the stairs. "Let that idiot go in first." Under the shackles and chains, the staggering giant was dragged up bit by dozens of strong men. The higher it went, the more the huge body trembled. Even though he was the ruler of hell, in front of this majestic palace, he was as humble as dust. In the territory of a fallen country, rulers were not rare, but there would always be only one supreme emperor. Anyone who dared to go against the will of the emperor would receive absolute punishment. As if it had foreseen the arrival of the end, the giant struggled with all its might. All the mouth parts on its body wailed, but when a door opened with a bang, all the sound disappeared. At the highest point, a pair of eyes looked down indifferently. Soon, the giant ruler who was brought in was brought out again, on a golden frame inlaid with luxurious gems, in an exquisite tapestry. A skillful craftsman vividly recreated the face full of fear and despair. It wailed eternally in the burning flames, but there was no sound. After venting his anger on the idiot, His Majesty added a new collection. His Majesty should be in a better mood. The jester said, "You can go in now." He did not disguise his words. In such a short distance, the voice even seemed to be narrating in the ears of the King of Withered, but there was no response from the palace. It seemed that the King of Withered did not care that his subject was trying to figure out his emotions. The door opened again. After a short silence, Hades lowered his head and stepped in. In the eternal darkness, he was actually a little absent-minded for a moment. He did not know whether he should hate Shur for what he did or thank him for taking away his eyes. At least at this moment, He was glad that he was blind. He could not see anything. He could only feel the terrifying existence sitting at the highest point in the darkness. Just by looking down, it was as if the darkness was stirred, making it difficult for Hades to breathe. "Why do you want to have an audience, Hades?" A curious voice came from the throne. The king of Withered looked down and asked coldly, "I remember that the last time I had an audience was not long ago." In the dead silence, Hades lowered his head in the direction of the voice. He did not dare to play around with words and answered directly, "I have an important responsibility." "Indeed, you should be afraid." The king of Withered's tone became playful. "But do you think I should be angry because of this?" Hades was silent, breathing heavily. In this short silence, he could only feel the gaze from the darkness, but he could not tell whether the words were a joke or something else. The only thing he could be sure of was that his answer might decide his fate, would decide whether he could leave this place in one piece or become a companion on the tapestry. But no matter how hard he thought, he could not find a complete answer. He took a deep breath and replied bitterly, "That's right. I don't know." A sneer came from the throne. It was impossible to tell whether it was mockery or praise. "Very good. Hades, I love your honesty." The king of Withered said, "Honesty is the foundation of loyalty. You have never lied to me, so I will let you go." Hades stiffened, not knowing whether he should be grateful or humble. He did not dare to respond. He could only kneel on the ground and accept the result that was his. "Let us return to the original matter about your mistake." The king of Withered said, "It was indeed a crushing defeat, and it also delayed the march of the fallen country. The operation of the Najilfa fleet was also hindered because of this. Hades, you betrayed my expectations of you, and this cannot make up for the loss you caused. You deserve to die 10,000 times." "That is true," Hades replied, giving up on all hope. "Then, after experiencing this setback, you must have made some progress, right?" The king of Withered asked, "Since all of you jesters are proud of your wisdom, why don't you tell me, how did you lose?" "Delay and negligence." Hades replied straightforwardly, "In order to be fully prepared, I gave my opponent a chance to attack, but in the end, I couldn't catch them in time and allowed them to escape, causing the fallen country to suffer the humiliation of defeat." "Perhaps, but you are mistaken about one thing," the king of Withered casually said. "For a fallen country, failure is never a humiliation. Victory and defeat are never rare. As long as there is a war, there will always be a victor, and then there will always be a loser. Victory is naturally worth bragging about, but defeat is also normal. As long as you don't die, there will always be a day when you win. Whether it is recuperating or struggling at death's door, it is all for the sake of waiting for the future. But your sin is not failure, Hades." The ruler on the throne coldly looked down, telling him word by word, "Failure is not a humiliation. Fear is—" At that moment, Hades froze in place. He subconsciously opened his mouth to speak, but did not dare to speak. He could only tremble. He was afraid that his words would be judged as a lie, but at the same time, he was also afraid that the king of Withered was telling the truth. "Look, Hades, you are afraid, but you are not afraid of me, because you are not afraid of death." The king of Withered laughed mockingly. "You are afraid of a person from the present, afraid that he will bring you failure, afraid that you will relive the humiliation of the past and not be able to raise your head again. Hades, tell me, am I right?" In the silence, Hades was stunned, his face twisted, but he did not make a sound. He did not have the courage to refute, but at the same time, he found that he could not control his anger. Was that resentment after being humiliated, or was it anger after having her true thoughts exposed? "Why don't you speak? Hades, you can speak freely." In the long silence, the figure on the throne looked down at him and grinned mockingly. I admire your talent, but I love your defeated appearance even more. It's like a wet, wild dog hiding under the eaves, seeking shelter. You are unwilling to hide your claws and fangs, but you can't resist the charity of others. Whether you intend to resist or offer your loyalty, I look forward to your actions. Hades pressed his fingers on the ground, trembling slightly. I am afraid. There is no need to be afraid, no need to be ashamed, and no need to be afraid because I have already enjoyed your performance. The King of Withered probed, full of curiosity. I just want to know, do you have the courage to step on the stage again? Hades was already sweating, and he pleaded with a trembling voice, please, give me another chance. How many legions did you lose? The King of Withered asked. 4. Other than that, how many losses were there? Tens of thousands of curse vessels and 6 large groups. Then I will give you 8 legions, double the number of weapons and curse vessels, and 12 large groups. The King of Withered waved his hand. Other than that, I will give Gala. Forget it. Gala is bent on going to the present state, and he may not be willing to cooperate with you. Let him be his vanguard. Other than him, you can choose a few people from my subordinates to cooperate with you. Also, don't those workshop owners want to participate? Let those good-for-nothings bleed a little. Yes, Hades said hurriedly. I will definitely. You don't have to promise, because I don't care. The King of Withered interrupted him and just raised his finger. As for this, take it as a reward for your repeated failures. A tragic scream sounded from below the steps. Just in front of Hades, a long rusty nail appeared out of thin air. In an instant, it wedged into his eye sockets, went deep into his skull, and grew rapidly. It brought a pain that went deep into his soul. It would accompany him forever. Now, you can please me again, Hades. With the King of Withered's words, the door behind Hades opened again. When Hades staggered out of the door, what he saw was endless shadows in the huge square. Only pairs of scarlet eyes slowly looked up, like ferocious stars that dotted the darkness. They quietly waited for his orders. Trembling in pain, Hades covered his face, and his smile gradually became hideous. Chapter 1040. I keep having the feeling that someone is thinking about me. In the former Dragonscale settlement, Huaishur suddenly sneezed. He wiped his nose and said with certainty, there must be a young lady thinking about me. You can forget about it. Raymond rolled his eyes. Maybe it's a man thinking about you. Then you should reflect on yourself. Huaishur thought for a moment and asked curiously, why aren't there any men thinking about you? Raymond's expression twitched, and he began to reflect from the bottom of his heart. Why did he have to be entangled with this little bastard? But what was even sadder was that he realized that this wasn't the first time he reflected. Why didn't he learn from his mistakes? It was better not to get involved in this kind of topic next time. I say, can you hurry up? He stared straight at the shadowless lamp above his head, lying on his back on the operating table. The front of his chest was wide open. Indeed, There was nothing wrong with being wide open in the physical sense. After the skin opened up on its own, there were no longer any bones and internal organs of an ordinary person below. After going through the fourth level transformation, he had completely become a part of sonship and could switch between flesh and steel at any time. Now, lying on the operating table was like a Terminator lying on a machine tool waiting to be modified. With the experience from last time, Weisher was already skilled this time. He took the electric screwdriver and nimbly removed the screws and steel plates, and then filled in the other equipment and instruments that had just been completed. After screwing the screws, Weisher patted Raymond's arm. Without needing to be told, he turned over with familiarity. On his back, a port popped out from the steel spine. What came next was the highlight of the show. Weisher opened the incubator beside him and carefully picked up an iron box that was as big as a heart. It was cold to the touch, and in the short few seconds it was taken out of the box, it was covered with a layer of cold mist. If it wasn't for the gloves, his fingers would almost be frozen on it. "Bear with it," Weisher said. "The temperature will be a little low. Hurry up, hurry up." Raymond clenched his teeth and closed his eyes. Then his face turned ferocious, and he couldn't help but let out an ear-piercing scream. This was because the liquid in the iron box had already been injected into the center of his spine and was rapidly spreading throughout his body. An evil chill instantly covered him from the inside out. His steel heart was beating wildly, constantly producing heat as hot as a furnace. However, that heat could only protect his soul from being completely torn apart by the evil chill that came from the metamorphosis of the calamity. It could not stop it from spreading. The moment the injection was completed, Weisher quickly retreated and raised his arm to cover his face. A frosty wind blew in his face. Raymond had already been frozen into an ice sculpture. Strands of residual liquid fell from the iron box, shrouding the entire crude operating theater in a bleak white. If it weren't for the fact that Weisher's origin substance was able to resist the corrosion of the disaster, he probably would have been caught up in it as well. Even with the ultimate seal, the temperature of the entire Dragonscale settlement instantly dropped by a lot, causing countless kobolds to shiver and tremble. Nether River Beta Serum. After Weisher completely boiled the entire Hundred Eyes settlement into boiled cabbage, the liquid substance extracted by Gregory was combined and cultivated with Raymond's own blood plasma to produce the result. It was also one of the necessary parts for high-level ascendance of the Eternal Road. In the Primordial Curse, its predecessor was called the Water of the Nether River, because it possessed the essence of the abyss and the terrifying low temperature of matter. It was enough to freeze and destroy everything it touched. But for Sonship, Anubis, and even Osiris and Horus, this was a blood tissue component that ascendants had to have in their bodies. Otherwise, the human nerves would not be able to connect tens of thousands of different instruments at the same time, transmit a lot of information while resisting the terrifying high temperature brought about by the operation of the body. It was a protective layer between the soul and the body, ensuring that the soul of the ascendant would not be burned by overly large miracles. It was like the water-cooling liquid in the chassis. With its existence, there was the possibility of operating and overclocking at ease. At the same time, it was also the foundation of a series of operations. Otherwise, it would be a joke to the lifespan of the Ascendant and Sonship. Even if it was the Eternal Road, low-level Ascendants would not be able to withstand its terrifying low temperature and corrosion of the soul and body, unless they had undergone a qualitative change of the fourth-grade origin substance, and the soul had completely merged with the miracles. Rashly installing it would be courting death. Now, Raymond had been completely swallowed by the evil coldness in the blood plasma, but under the thick layer of ice, the pair of eyes still flickered, revealing a luster. As time passed, the cold air emitted began to slowly decrease, as if it was sealed in the body. Gradually, the temperature of the entire operating room returned to an acceptable level. Soon, under the layer of ice, Raymond's fingers moved with difficulty, and his eyes looked at Huai Shi. Call for help. Huai Shi picked up Ah Fong and saw Raymond's frightened expression under the layer of ice. After hesitating for a moment, he switched to the hand hammer in the operating box. The layer of ice was shattered in no time, and Redmond walked out of it, shivering. He could barely stand straight. His body was still emitting a terrifyingly low temperature, and there was no trace of blood. I'm freezing to death. His lips trembled, and his face was pale. Water. Do you have hot water? Come, big brother, drink molten iron. It's strong. Huai Shi picked up a sealed metal bucket and stuffed it into his arms. It had been prepared a long time ago. Raymond's body temperature was still 100 degrees below zero. Ordinary water would probably be completely frozen before being poured into his mouth and would have no effect at all. No, the engine's power is still not enough. I almost couldn't withstand it. Redmond kept sneezing as he hugged a bucket of molten iron to keep warm. Huai Shi was beside him, constantly changing new ones for him. Relying on the heat of the furnace, the Heart's engine was constantly pressurized, and in any case, he had endured the most difficult period. In the end, the conditions in the infernal realm were simple and crude. Otherwise, the entire set of equipment would have been replaced, along with the skeleton. However, the Styx blood plasma, which had been rushed at the last minute, was something that was barely passable. It would probably have to be replaced in the future. Now, with 2 rooms, he could barely survive. Compared to Raymond, who was about to freeze to death, the red dragon in the workshop was full of firepower. In the high temperature of the wheel cabin, the sun ship roared. F***K. I'm burning. That's it. No way. Beelzebub controlled countless mechanical arms to prepare, and at the same time, he spoke in a strange tone through the broadcast. No way. Don't tell me some country body is so excited just because it has a trash engine added, right? At least I have an engine. It's better than some people who don't even have an engine and an incomplete body. The red dragon sneered. What's wrong? Why aren't you talking, stinky brother? You broke the defense? Just you wait, dog. I'll F***king install Osiris's self-destruct array for you now. Come, whoever's scared is a dog. Dog barks again. Dog, don't be scared. Dog barks again. In the deafening roar, Gregory, who was controlling the secret device, could not help but scratch his head. He looked at Anton and said, "These 2 have been arguing since the morning. Is there something wrong with their heads? One is an AI, and the other is a dragon. They're getting along quite well. It's fine as long as there are no delays." Anton calmly looked at the reading on the large screen. The operation of the second production line is a bit unstable. Those dog-headed people are too slow. Huai Shi's crows are better. Let them work 2 more shifts. Sleep? No sleep. Gregory looked at the crows working hard in the secret device and crossed his legs in satisfaction. At this moment, the entire Dragon Scale settlement had almost become a super large production workshop. Under the cover of Fishball's secret device, this place could be regarded as the interior of Helios, isolated from the corrosion of hell. The laws from the reality operated here, covering all the steps of production. It only took Anton 3 hours to finish the first workshop, starting from a lathe that was moved out of the storage of trucks. Other than the casting and rough processing parts, which were separated and handed over to Huai Shi, the rest of the forging, stamping, welding, heat treatment, and even assembly and testing were all done by him alone. Unfortunately, the requirements for electrical engineering were too harsh and could not be achieved freely. Some parts and important equipment could only be used from the storage truck or simply dismantled and modified. The gap was still too large. In contrast, the need for manpower was not so exaggerated. Most of the miscellaneous tasks were done by the dog-headed people, and the parts of the production line that required coordination and precision operations were handled by the crows. Under the incentive of the reward, the crows' enthusiasm for work was high, and the results were outstanding. By the way, Weischer's reward was the mysterious disc that Raymond hid under the cabinet. The progress of the project was smoother than expected. In order to really verify whether they had the ability to modify the sun ship, they did not bite off more than they could chew from the beginning, and only chose the outer armor project. Weischer provided the materials and forging, and after being processed and modified by Anton, it was finally etched and refined by Gregory. The whole process was supervised by Beelzebub. It only took a day for all the armor to be produced and assembled. All the parameters were up to standard. Except for the lack of durability due to the rough production process, there were no shortcomings. However, no one expected it to be strong for long. At most, it would last for a month before it was completely modified in the reality. In addition, Professor Anton and Gregory also worked together to try out the precious materials provided by Five Eyes and the remaining nails to make 2 sets of engine units. As expected, one set of equipment was scrapped, while the other set of equipment was a success after the former had accumulated enough experience. Now that the assembly was completed, it was equivalent to temporarily adding a small heart to the sun ship, directly increasing the output of the sun ship by 30%. This caused Beelzebub to be a bit intoxicated for the past 2 days. Chapter 1041. The fall of the Hundred Eyes settlement wasn't a secret. In fact, when the 2 sides were fighting, they had already attracted the attention of countless parties. Whether it was the magic eye, water mirror, divination, or some other strange method, everyone was paying close attention to the process and outcome of this battle. Unexpectedly, as soon as they opened their eyes, they saw it all. No more. A fierce battle? No. A life and death battle? No. There was only a big pot of stewing, boiling water, and cabbage. Forster's shot made many people's hair stand on end. Then, Weischer's methods made their hearts turn cold. If they were dead, they were dead. Why did they have to whip their corpses? In the end, who is the one from hell? For a moment, the terrifying danger brought about by the 2 people who had appeared weighed heavily on everyone's hearts. This included the 4 crowned people led by the Death Skull settlement. It was the idea of the 5 crowned people to release the Shadow Beast to attack. In the end, the huge Five Eyes was gone just like that. It was all for nothing. On the night when the Five Eyes were chilled to the bone, countless tribes activated their secret devices and were on full alert, fearing that this group of unknown people would take advantage of the victory and pursue them to eliminate them completely. In the end, the group of kobolds turned around and went back. They even went back and forth several times to bring back the mountain of iron ingots. As for the rest, they didn't even look at it. This made people feel sad and angry that not only did the wolves not come, but they also looked down on them. Although they were sad and angry, they still had to change their lives. However, they couldn't go on doing nothing. After all, such a big scourge was squatting right next to their home. Everyone would feel uneasy, and even if they weren't, they would feel uneasy. Not to mention, there was the tragic fate of the Hundred Eyes settlement and the blood tax from the fallen kingdom. The entire Rusty Pagoda Forest was in chaos. The atmosphere in the Death Skull settlement was gloomy. There's nothing else to say. No matter what the other party's goal is, we can only fight against them by gathering together. The leader of the Death Skull settlement, Undead, said, "I'm willing to abide by the contract and open up the defense of the Death Skull settlement to you. We'll gather our forces and fight against the enemy together. I hope that everyone won't fight among themselves at this time. Only by uniting can we have a future. At this time, the most panicked person was undoubtedly Undead. After all, its hometown was the closest to Dragonscale settlement. Back then, in order to control this group of kobolds, it had specially ordered them to move the settlement into its territory. Who would have thought that they would meet with a calamity now? What an unlucky bastard. The others naturally didn't have anything to say. Everyone understood that if the lips were gone, the teeth would be cold. What's more, even if others exhausted their opponents, when it was their turn, would they have the confidence to take them down? Under the pressure of the blood tax for a long time, the rusty pagoda forest had faintly shown signs of integration, and it was not the first time they had joined forces. Everyone knew that once they fell apart, no one would be able to continue controlling the rusty pagoda forest. They would not be able to get the other tribes to obediently pay the blood tax for them. What about asking for help? The giant worm asked, "Are we just going to sit back and do nothing when our country is destroyed? Now that the fallen nation is busy with the War of the Worlds, where would they have the time to care about us?" Undead coldly snorted. "I finally managed to connect the channels, but as soon as the tax collector heard that we weren't paying blood tax, he began to deal with people. Haha, guess what they said? They told us to wait patiently, and there will definitely be reinforcements. They're lying to the goblins. If we rely on them, we won't even have ashes left." For a moment, everyone's hearts turned cold. Even if they knew that this life-saving straw would most likely not be of any use, now that the straw had turned rotten before it was even used, how could they restrain the resentment and sadness in their hearts? What's more, even if it was just for show, it was better than using this kind of nonsense to fool them, right? If that's the case, that's all we can do. The insect lord let out an ear-piercing cry. The monstrous monsters made up of countless twisted limbs, and the giant harpies had no other choice as well. At this point, don't be stingy. Everyone, take out all your weapons. Undead said, "I just hope that when the time comes, we won't drag each other down." The monster said vaguely, "Morning Mountain Settlement will take out the snake drum." "I will let the children bring the lightning-splitting spears," the harpy responded, "but we need you to provide food." Naturally, Undead nodded. After a moment of silence, he suddenly said, "In addition, I want to unseal that relic." There was a long dead silence. The crown wearers looked at each other and couldn't help but be shocked. They angrily questioned, "Are you crazy? Can you afford to pay that kind of price?" When they sealed that damned thing, they sacrificed more than half of the large group and even injured themselves for hundreds of years before they took down the rusty pagoda forest. Even if the natives were long gone, this house still left behind the last treasure, and at the same time, the deepest curse. In order to get things done once and for all, they used the most thorough method to seal the crisis. Now that they wanted to reopen it, they had to offer a great sacrifice, and at that time, they might not have the ability to deal with it. "Do we have to do this?" The harpy asked. Undead's eye sockets shone with a cold light as he asked, "Compared to now, which is worse?" No one spoke again. In the end, there were only murmurs full of hatred. "Do we have any other choice?" Under the gaze of Undead, there were no other voices. The resolution to fight to the death was thus passed. Next, it was the unsealing ceremony. A large number of slaves, deformed children, and sacrifices from various settlements were beheaded and bled by the priests and thrown into the bottomless pit in the center of the Death Skull settlement, until the rotten blood overflowed from it. After a day of praising and presiding over it, a strange light emerged from it, illuminating the face of Undead. The seal was about to be unsealed. Undead grinned like a hideous grin. He could feel the terrifying power that emerged from it. He could also feel the tremors of the earth. A loud noise burst out from the distance, causing the earth to shake. The loud noise rose like thunder, echoing repeatedly in the narrow sky. Then, fanatical praises sounded. Under the broken tower, on the road outside the Death Skull settlement, countless banners were raised high, and the sacred emblem from Bahamut flapped in the wind. Kobolds covered in heavy armor carried banners on their backs and did their best to throw themselves into the great praises. They could not wait to step onto the path of war. In the past, there were hundreds and thousands of cannon fodders. At this moment, when they gathered together and sang feverishly, their eyes were filled with an incomprehensible brilliance. The fanaticism made people's scalps tingle. It was as if the owner had opened the cage and released the chains, so the hunting dogs flew out. They covered the mountains and plains without any order, and at the same time, without any scruples, they pounced on their enemies. Fire! Fire! On the city wall of the Death Skull settlement, the commander shouted and blew the horn with all his might. Suddenly, countless molten fire spewed out from the huge cannons on the city wall. Thick smoke billowed from the scarlet lava as it arced through the air. When it landed on the ground, it suddenly exploded, setting off countless waves of air out of nowhere. But it did not hit many people at all. It did not even stop the kobolds from continuing to charge mindlessly. At this moment, their minds were filled with the great brilliance of the final dragon, Bahamut. Their eyes were burning red, and they did not stop at all. These guys had no concept of cooperation and formations in their minds at all. Their formation was like sassafras, without any rules and tactics. However, it was this kind of scattered formation tactic that avoided the damage caused by the artillery fire to the greatest extent. Then, what emerged from the end of the earth was billowing smoke. The steel chariots, assembled with all the treasures of some of the mechanical monsters made of simple steel, had 6 wheels, some had caterpillar tracks, and some had 8 legs like spiders crawling on the ground. After being modified by Anton and Gregory, almost all the leftovers were used on them. After a complete iteration and renewal, they had been reborn and reborn. Bahamut's sacred emblem fluttered on every chariot. It was branded with a huge, rough, and ferocious dog head. Endless greed was contained in it, and it smiled coldly at the hell in front of it. But the smoke that covered the sky did not come from these tiny specks of dust. Instead, it was a bigger shadow. It was darker, more violent, and more ferocious. It was some kind of huge and strange existence. On the city wall, the gargoyle almost crushed the crude telescope in his hand. He could not believe his eyes. It was a warship, under the protection of the undead army and the white-scaled guards. A huge warship was moving on the ground. Its terrifying weight crushed the ground, leaving a straight gully. Gentle ripples of water enveloped its surroundings, causing rocks to shatter and barren hills to crumble. Everything that stood in its way was simply trampled into mud. It left a pitch-black gully. Gloomy black clouds followed in its surroundings. Countless gigantic iron crows rose and fell. They let out high-pitched cries, and their scarlet eyes made people tremble in fear. Amidst the high-pitched steam whistle, countless kobolds on the deck shouted excitedly. They stuck out their tongues and danced in ecstasy. They played all kinds of strange instruments in a mess, adding a new and strange tune to the noisy and sharp hymn. The black warship was moving forward, toward the enemy, as if it was crushing everyone's heart. Every inch forward made it harder for them to breathe. When the huge silhouette was close at hand, the city wall was dead silent. The crown wearers' gazes were cold and fearful. They suppressed their large flock, and the sound of countless blades rubbing against each other rose and fell. The harpies had already risen into the air and were calling loudly at the crows not far away. War was about to break out. Those damn bastards, The undead squeezed out a furious voice from the gaps of its bones. "We haven't attacked them yet, and they're already here to seek death." At this moment, on the deck, Raymond felt that the scenery was boundless. He sat on the captain's throne in the middle of a large group of Hell Guards. He held his chin in his hand, and his expression was solemn. He was imposing without being angry. Behind him were top-notch assistants like Gregory and Anton. In front and left were the two great guardians like Huaishur and Forster. There was no need to say much about his imposing manner. The sour feeling in his heart made the corners of his mouth twitch uncontrollably. "No, I can't laugh. Once I laugh, I'll lose my cool. Raymond, you have to calm down. You have to calm down. The good days have just begun. Why don't we invite everyone from the Dead Skull Settlement, Morning Mountain Settlement, and Cloud Hunter Settlement to board the ship together? When the time comes, you will be the bow of the ship, and it will be the stern. Everyone will work together, sincerely, and integrate into one. Together, we will traverse hell and dominate the abyss. Isn't that beautiful?" For a moment, in the dead silence, everyone looked at each other. It was difficult to understand the absurdity of it, but when that strange voice echoed in their ears, they couldn't help but feel that this guy seemed to, perhaps, make some sense. Their minds wavered. Corpse, who had the highest soul resistance, was the first to react. He broke free from Huaishur's bewitchment, and the flames in his eyes burned red in anger. He roared in anger. "Arrogant person, since you refuse to come to your senses, today will be the day of your burial." Corpse raised his finger, and suddenly countless bones appeared from the void. They piled up into towering bone walls, shrouding the surroundings of the Dead Skull Settlement, turning the entire settlement into a city of bones with sharp edges and corners. Countless viscous blood seeped out from between the gaps of the white bones. The blazing blood sizzled in the air and quickly turned into a thick blood mist, covering the kobolds all over the mountains. For a moment, screams rose and fell, lingering in the ears. The blood mist was like a strong acid, and the kobolds at the front rolled on the ground. Their flesh and blood were charred, and they struggled in pain. "I kindly asked you to share the hegemony with me. It's fine if you don't agree, but you even spoke ill of me and even wanted to hit me?" On the bow of the ship, Huaishur shook his head helplessly, exasperated. "I'm doing this for your own good. By the way, what day is it today?" The second half of the sentence was directed to Forster behind him. Forster subconsciously glanced at the time on his wristwatch. "Thursday. Oh, then it's fine." Huaishur stroked the white cat that had appeared out of nowhere in his arms. His fingers scratched its chin twice, causing the white cat to squint its eyes in satisfaction. It meowed. In an instant, a pure white halo enveloped the entire battlefield. Wherever it passed, countless drops of sweet dew fell like rain. Different from the code of war, the treaty of peace was in effect. Then, the screams began to quickly disappear. In the blood mist, the kobolds who were rolling and struggling on the ground actually got up again under the astonished gazes of many people. They were completely fine. It was as if everything that happened just now was just for show, as if they were afraid that the kobolds would be sad because they saw the kobolds attack. However, the large group of people with good eyesight had already seen the kobolds' figures begin to change. Under the rusty armor and thick fur, all the corroded wounds were recovering rapidly. Not only that, but strands of strange colors were also growing out from the wounds. The twisted plants took root and sprouted at a terrifying speed, taking root in the wounds and wrapping around the kobolds' limbs. They absorbed the vicious blood mist in the air and grew into pure, white flowers, looking extremely holy and enchanting. The fragrance spread. A huge amount of hallucinogens and stimulants floated in the air. Countless tiny spores brought about extremely realistic illusions, turning the hell before them into a holy kingdom, filled with holy light. The kobolds didn't care how strange and terrifying the parasites on their bodies were. They were still feverishly praising Bahamut's miracles and charging forward without any regard for their own safety. They carried simple ladders and climbed up the sharp walls one by one, climbing up. Their crazy, zombie-like appearance caused the large group of hell creatures to have goosebumps. However, each of them had a terrifyingly tenacious vitality. They couldn't be killed. Even if they were bombarded by giant cannons and burned to a crisp by molten fire, they would quickly regenerate, and the flowers on their bodies would bloom even more vigorously and fragrantly. Their fighting spirit also grew stronger. Such a crazy attack caused countless defenders to suck in a breath of cold air, unable to restrain the trembling in their hearts. On the deck, the respected elder held his sword and looked at the countless strange torrents that were climbing up the city walls. While he was shocked and fearful, he couldn't help but remind in a low voice, the Dead Skull Settlement has gathered 5 or 6 large groups. If you want to rely on them, I'm afraid it will be difficult to break through. Why don't we let the white-scaled guards first? After all, they had received money and had to do something. They had to show off. Otherwise, even the respected elder wouldn't be able to stand it, let alone Huaishur. There's no hurry. Huaishur rubbed the white cat in his arms and said calmly, "We don't need you to attack the city. After that, there will naturally be places for you to display your usefulness. Respected elder, order your subordinates to gather and follow behind us." The respected elder was stunned for a moment. Then the enemy's city defense. It's very simple. Huaishur glanced at the towering wall of white bones. Can't we just crash into it? At that moment, the sun ship crashed into the array. Amidst the crazy laughter of the red dragon, a high-pitched whistle burst forth. The pitch-black warship rumbled forward. The engine didn't turn as it forcibly braved the countless molten cannons and dark rays on the city walls. In this short distance of 2 kilometers, it began to accelerate crazily. It stepped on the accelerator. It was laughing maniacally. Ever since it advanced, it had been running and being beaten up on the ground. It had been sullen until now and hadn't had the chance to truly show off. Now, it could finally appear. From the engine to the rudder, its entire dragon had already ignited. Don't talk to me about strategy and tactics, and don't talk about city walls, defense, or opponents. It's just a damn word. Crash. Now, accompanied by the whistling hurricane, the terrifying black shadow rapidly enlarged until it covered every frightened and confused face on the city walls. Then there was a loud noise that seemed to shake the entire world. Countless white bones rained down like a storm. Then the stone walls crumbled and collapsed, along with countless guardians. At that moment, they were all sent flying into the sky with shrill howls before falling down and shattering into pieces by the impact of this heavy impact. When the violent tremors of the earth and the sweeping hurricane finally stopped, there were no longer any city walls in front of them. Only a large amount of collapsed bricks and stones tumbled down. Under the heavy armor of the sun ship that only had a few more scratches, there was already a devastated city defense and walls that had completely collapsed and collapsed. There was no need for a gate anymore. Under this passionate impact, Death Skull Settlement let down their last bit of defense and opened their arms to the guests. Now, in the dead silence, Huaishur turned around and instructed the respected elder, "You can go now." Chapter 1042. There was no need to think. Just as Huaishur finished speaking, the elder instinctively turned around and snatched the bugle horn from the priest's hand. She raised it high and blew it with all her might. A resounding sound that couldn't be heard by human ears burst forth from the vibration of the poisoned copper. It sharply reverberated in the ears of every snakeman, causing them to execute the military order from the elder without hesitation. Attack! All-out attack! In front of the collapsed city wall, a white flood swept out from both sides of the stranded sun ship. It was the snakemen chasing after the sun ship. They seized this crucial opportunity to break through the city wall and drew their swords. Just like a snake's poison, it injected into the prey's body and spread, bringing death. After giving the order, the elder tossed the horn back to the priest, indicating for him to stay here and relay his orders. He bowed to Huaishur, then took 2 steps back and jumped down from the bow of the ship, joining the advancing white-scaled guards, as he shouted, "Brother Huaishur, Brother Huaishur!" Raise the flag. Accompanied by her hoarse voice, the precious insignia bestowed by the eternal ring slowly rose from the vast expanse of whiteness. That chaotic ring, which contained mercy and cruelty, fluttered in the wind. Those huge lizard-like beasts burst forth with waves of toad-like cries as they advanced. The mobility of the undead army was completely meaningless in the siege battle and the following street battles. Now, all the cavalry had already dismounted from their mounts and spread their arms, allowing their retainers to drape the heavy armor over their bodies. They raised their halberds and large shields and gathered into formation under the elder's orders. In the chaos, the large group behind the city wall simply didn't have time to make an effective response. They even lost their original barrier and geographical advantage. At the very front were those lizards that were taller than ordinary people by half their bodies. These strange creatures raised by the snakemen possessed a terrifying weight and scales that were as hard as metal. Now, after tearing down the knights, what they carried on their backs were countless sharp barbs, becoming the barrier that the white-scaled guards relied on. Under the siege and counterattack of those corpse warriors, they forcibly propped up a position in the square in front of the ship's bow. After that, there was no place for any tactics or other strange tactics to be displayed. All that was left was a scalp-numbing slaughter. At the entrance of the square, on the narrow streets, and even in the gaps where normal people couldn't even turn around, every hell creature held a weapon in their hands. Their eyes were scarlet as they attacked their enemies. There was no space to dodge or retreat. Right next to the blood-gushing deep well, in the secret ritual, the insect king took the lead to spread its wings and transformed into a swarm of insects that covered the sky and earth, flying towards the battlefield. Then, the monster formed from countless intertwined limbs let out a muffled sound. Those limbs rapidly shrank and overlapped, turning into an illusory door. Then, the door abruptly rolled inwards and swallowed the monster whole. Right at the edge of the city wall, above the settlement, an opening propped up by a deformed limb quickly opened. Countless slender arms stretched out from within and grabbed at sun ship below. Forster stared with wide eyes for a long time, but he still didn't see the other party's main body appear. After Five Eyes' lesson, they were all scared out of their wits by that elusive bullet. This group of fellows wouldn't show their heads even if they were beaten to death. The deformed monster hid in the strange crevice, only extending those strange limbs to tightly wrap around Sun Ship. When the limbs contracted, it actually caused the thick armor to faintly vibrate. Not only in the air, but in all blind spots, these strange limbs would extend out. They were like the palms of a drowning person, pulling everything or people they could grab, tearing them into pieces, or pulling them into the darkness of the crevice, crushing them under the pressure of countless limbs. The first to bear the brunt was Huaishur at the very front. As if he was stunned, he didn't react at all. He was pulled and shrouded by layers of limbs. The countless eyes on the deformed arms immediately shone with ecstasy, but soon after, it felt like something was wrong, because it wasn't able to grab onto anything. Instead, it seemed like it had touched an empty space. For a moment, it actually couldn't find the end. It was as if the young man standing at the bow of the ship was just an illusion, a human-shaped gap. Behind the gap, there was an even more vast and strange space. But it couldn't see anything. There was only darkness, a darkness that even hell itself paled in comparison, one that made it involuntarily tremble. In the darkness, there was a terrifying silhouette that was slowly rising. Those limbs paused for a moment and instinctively trembled. They quickly contracted, wanting to pull out. Unfortunately, it was already too late. All the deformed limbs that reached into the darkness seemed to be pulled by something invisible. Huaisha lowered his head in a daze and looked at the small hands that were touching his chest. He was full of doubt and puzzlement. Why are you touching my ultimate? Are all the crown wearers in hell so passionate? I haven't even said anything. So how did it get to me in one step? He scratched his head, thought for a moment, and still said seriously to the deformed monster, "Thank you." Those scarlet eyes looked down, looking at the strange, fat, and thick insects. They were full of curiosity. Can it be eaten? Is it tasty? Why don't I try it? The resentful, bloody light quietly spread between the countless wings. The predators shouted excitedly, calling for their relatives and friends, and charged toward the takeout that was delivered to their door. It was time to eat. Wait, wait! The insect lord subconsciously shouted. I'm willing to surrender. I'm willing to. There was no time for him to finish his sentence. The hungry crows had already swallowed everything. In the endless despair, only the wails that resounded through the sky were left. Save me! Save me! In the deepest part of the Death Skull settlement, the insect lord's miserable cries kept coming, but the undead was expressionless and did not move at all, until the sound completely disappeared. As early as the moment it betrayed the alliance and fled, this damn old insect was on the undead's must-kill list. Beside him, the harpy's face had already turned pale. Holding the lightning spear in her hand, she could not help but tremble. She was clearly the insufferably arrogant ruler and crown-bearer in the past, but now she was like a hen that had been caught out of a cage. What should we do? The harpy turned back to look at the undead. She was at a loss. This group of reality realm ambushers were too fierce and too outrageous. The guy who originally said that he was going to carry his sister to victory instantly gave her a 10-0. How the hell were they going to fight this match? The undead did not speak. The wisps in his eye sockets flickered and gradually wavered. Finally, he glanced at the deep well that was overflowing with blood under his feet, and his voice became hoarse. Now that things have come to this, there's nothing more to do. Let's go. Go. The harpy's eyes instantly lit up. That's right. Use this secret device to blow up the Death Skull settlement. We'll take advantage of this opportunity to charge out. They won't be able to stop us. So bang. The moment she turned around, a deathly pale skeletal hand protruded from her chest, clenched her heart, and abruptly crushed it. Go, you bunch of trash. How much effort did I put in? How much time did I put in? How much time did I put in? How much effort did I put in? The undead stuck close to her back, his voice cold. And now, just because of a small setback, you're crying and yelling that you want to become the Withered King's dogs. Instead of letting him take advantage of you, why don't you give it to me? As soon as he finished speaking, the strange undead opened his mouth, and his sharp teeth sank into the harpy's neck. He did his best to suck out her blood, origin substance, and even her soul. The harpy cried out in pain, calling out to her descendants and the large group as she struggled in vain. However, within the city, countless corpse warriors had already begun their assault, cruelly slaughtering all living creatures. Only fresh blood continued to flow, continuously gathering towards the pool of blood in the deep well. The undead feasted on the boiling pool of blood. Finally, he had absorbed enough souls. His shriveled face gradually began to fill out, and he began to regain his former appearance. His 6 eyes gazed down at the pool of blood beneath his feet. He loosened his grip. He allowed the harpy's corpse to fall into the pool of blood, becoming the last precious resource. In that instant, the secret device sealed in the deepest part of the Death Skull settlement was finally unraveled. The massive rusty tower forest began to tremble violently. Countless broken towers began to emit a cold glow that intersected with each other, tearing through the dark clouds and disappearing into the deep well of blood. In the deep well, a scarlet altar slowly rose up. A strange rock slowly wriggled on top of the altar, expanding and contracting as it emanated a boundless malice. It was like a heart. The moment it appeared, everyone within a few hundred kilometers of the Death Skull settlement felt a bone-piercing chill, making it difficult for them to breathe. Their consciousness began to waver, as if their souls were about to leave their bodies and fly towards the rock. This day has finally come. The undead laughed hoarsely as he reached out towards the altar. Now, under the nourishment of countless fresh blood, this power from the rusty tower forest had completely awakened. This relic that had been slumbering in hell for tens of thousands of years finally belonged to him. Slap! Right next to him, a hand suddenly reached out and grabbed his wrist. Like an iron clamp, an awkward silence suddenly ensued. The undead's smile stiffened on his face. He turned his head with difficulty, but all he saw was the young face from the present realm. It was as if he had caught a pickpocket, who was secretly rummaging through his pockets. Huaisher asked solemnly, how can you touch other people's things? Among them, the majority of them had been bombarded by Afam. However, there was also a portion that he had abandoned on his own accord. After extracting all of his power and condensing it into a vengeful spirit, he finally broke free from Huaisher's grip and escaped. Then, he activated the final secret ritual, allowing the ultimate in the shadows to suck away most of its power. Its soul flowed into the heart of rock iron on the altar through the alchemy array. Under Huaisher's suppression and ravaging, he had already sunk into a state of madness. He didn't care about the terrible price he had to pay and took the initiative to offer himself as a sacrifice to that evil thing that had been sleeping for tens of thousands of years. In an instant, the silent heart of rock iron on the altar fiercely beat once again. Thunder rumbled. The entire infernal realm seemed to tremble slightly. Immediately after, there was a tragic cry. The corpse roared angrily, as if it had fallen into a raging inferno of endless torment. In the bottomless well, the surging blood suddenly gushed out, forming a red tide. In the blink of an eye, it covered more than half of the Death Skull settlement. The suppression of a superior existence descended. Suffocation. Throughout the rusty pagoda forest, countless broken pagoda collapsed rapidly. The plants withered, the birds wailed, and the snakes, insects, rats, and ants hidden under the soil struggled with difficulty, but they quickly withered into a pile of dust. It was as if all life had been taken away by that strange heart. The heart of rock iron began to come to life again. The stony color faded, and vitality reappeared. Countless tentacle-like flesh and blood tangled together and grew out of the blood. When the broken towers collapsed, what formed around the heart were strange, deformed bones. In the end, the altar shattered with a loud bang. At the cost of the complete desolation of the entire infernal realm, the fossils left behind by the past rulers after their deaths once again reappeared in their original outline. However, no matter how many sacrifices and risks there were, they couldn't recreate that terrifying majesty. At this moment, the huge humanoid body couldn't be considered complete at all. On the body that was more than 100 meters, long, jagged white bones were exposed in most places, and even the bones were covered in cracks. 2 of the 4 arms had been broken at the elbow, and the last one was simply not exposed. After losing most of its internal organs and flesh, it was just an empty shell. Even its face was incomplete, and only swollen, rotten flesh covered a small part of it. However, when it raised its face, its single eye shone brightly. It was as if an eternal thunderbolt was entwined in that eye, and even if it died, it would not dissipate. The King of Pygmies. The origin of that heart was actually from the ruler of the Sea of Thunder. It originated from the place covered by endless storms and thunderbolts. The place known as the Sea of Thunder was the infernal realm's ocean that covered an area of dozens of meters deep. The descendants of the giants were the well-deserved overlords of that ocean. Countless years ago, their world had already ushered in destruction and solidification. However, even after falling into infernal realm, their existence continued for countless eras until today, and they formed a colossus that was not inferior to a fallen country. They called themselves dwarfs because their current height of dozens of meters could no longer be compared to the magnificent bodies of their ancestors, who were thousands of meters tall. Even so, their strength did not weaken in the slightest. At this moment, what appeared in front of Huaishur and the others was the path of the exiles. In the Sea of Thunder, on the countless islands, if the dwarf kings who were the rulers lost in the Battle of Glory, they would lose all their power, spouses, and children. They would bear the tattoo of shame and embark on the long path of exile alone, until one day they would return and take revenge on the enemy who had taken everything away from them. Or they would silently die in some distant infernal realm. Perhaps thousands or tens of thousands of years ago, a certain dwarf king riddled with scars would come to this desolate infernal realm and welcome his own end. He would silently die from a curse, an old wound, or the pursuit of the victors. The giant corpse fell, and the disaster transformed. Countless bones formed a giant tower that reached into the sky. The entire rusty pagoda forest had grown out of its corpse. Now, when the ironstone heart that had been dormant for tens of thousands of years beat again, violent origin substance fluctuations surged from the rotten and broken body. All of you will die. The corpse's deranged consciousness flowed out from its remaining eye. When it sensed its powerful strength and unprecedented weakness, it immediately became even more berserk. According to its original plan, after sacrificing all the crowns, it should be able to transform into a true ruler. Even the weakest ruler would still be a ruler. But now, it only had a single harpy as a sacrifice. Even if it sacrificed an entire settlement, it would only be able to bring back this kind of thing. It was still in the same place, and the sacrifices it had prepared, from the five-eyed monster to the insect king, had all been swallowed by the other side. Gone. Hundreds of years of planning had been destroyed along with all of its resources. Now, the corpse had already sunk into complete madness. He raised his remaining thick right arm and slammed it beneath his feet, crushing the countless kobolds and white-scaled guards around him into dust. Immediately afterwards, the rotten face looked up. Light shot out from its single eye. The ironstone heart madly beat, extracting the life force from the entire rusty tower forest, causing that single eye to shine with a terrifying light that surpassed the sun. Even if he was extremely furious at this moment, Undead Corpse still maintained a precious trace of calmness in his heart. Even if he was no longer the same as before, if he squandered this hard-earned strength, then there was still the possibility of defeat. It had to immediately cause irreparable damage to the other side before they could react. Only then would it be possible to completely grasp victory. It had to attack the other side's weakness, heavily injure the other side. In other words, to catch bandits, first catch the king. Under the gaze of that single eye, the entire infernal realm was in its eyes. Not a single trace could escape its eyes, including all of Weishur's changes. But at this moment, it didn't put Weishur in its eyes at all. A lousy pawn that charged and broke through the enemy lines. Even if it was powerful, it was just a tool of a true powerhouse. And Forster, who was holding a shotgun and aiming vigilantly from afar, was just an assassin that couldn't be put on the stage. The real leader of that group of people, the real important existence among them, had already been discovered by him. That leader who had never shown himself since coming to the Rusty Tower Forest, and had always been hiding behind the scenes, plotting all of this. Even after the war had begun, the person who sat on his throne, surrounded by his subordinates, coldly looked down on all of this from the perspective of the present realm. There was only one truth. The ferocious single eye suddenly turned and aimed at Sunship, locking onto the opponent who thought he was safe and even sneered in disdain. Die! At that moment, on the captain's throne, Raymond's smile froze on his face. Lifeless. Countless lightning bolts turned into a flood, and with a loud boom, the disaster brewed from the endless dark clouds in the sea of lightning descended. Endless lightning bolts gushed out from the corpse's single eye. The entire world turned dark in an instant. Everything that stood in the way of the lightning was completely vaporized. The heat from the aftershock spread, melting and dissipating countless ruins and kobolds, turning them into putrid green smoke. Everywhere it passed, everything welcomed destruction. This was the Dwarf King's fury, the genuine fury of lightning. Raymond, on the other hand, only had time to let out a terrified scream. Glittering tears rushed out from the corners of his eyes, and at that moment grief, indignation, and bewilderment instinctively flowed out from his soul. F***CK, why is it me? The next moment, the secret device Gregory had propped up dissipated like a bubble. Then Sunship fell apart, the steel melted, and was completely scrapped. The strength of a human was simply unable to contend against the strength of a giant, and it wasn't even enough to shake its enormous weight. It was just a futile effort. He spread out his arms, and just as he was about to break the chains in his hands, he saw Weishur take a step back and throw Ah Fong to the ground. The earth trembled and wailed. A terrifying mass comparable to the entire Stone Marrow building was nailed into the rusty earth of the pagoda forest. The instant Weishur's right hand swept across the long mace, a metallic light condensed and turned into a giant capstan. The sorrowful rope pierced through the air, wrapping around the mace. In the blink of an eye, a complicated pulley was completed. When Weishur flicked his finger, the flames of the angry axe reignited from the depths of hell. The enormous origin substance incarnation descended, pulling at the chains and brazenly smashing through the ruins in front of him. After tearing through the layers of obstacles, it madly rushed off into the distance. The sorrowful rope tightened, and the capstan spun rapidly. Accompanied by an ear-piercing grinding sound, countless sparks shot out. The corpse's movements came to an abrupt halt, and its twisted neck stiffened in place. Immediately after, under the simple miracle of physics, a crisp sound burst forth. Crack! The low sound of bones disconnecting spread out, and the lightning bolt disappeared without a trace. The corpse's vision went black, and it staggered back a step. Immediately after, there was a loud crash as it fell to the ground. Under the rotation of the capstan and the binding of the sorrowful rope, it actually knelt on the ground, its head pressed against the ground in humiliation, unable to lift up. It was as if it was facing a god. It was bowing down in worship to the man in front of it. "Don't stand so high. I don't like looking up at people. Huaisha raised his hand and patted its face, as if praising it. Look, you're much more pleasing to the eye now. Huaisha waved her sword in the face of the hurricane, tearing it apart. When the time comes, only the wearer of the crown will be left. The freshest ingredients should be processed in the fastest way. Huaisha stepped on the ruins and rolled up his sleeves. Besides, it's just for show. No matter how strong it is, it can't be stronger than that shameful rotten dream, right? The pygmy king looked like he was looking at a dead piece of pork on the chopping board. The pygmy king's anger burst forth once again, turning into tangible lightning that wrapped around the huge body, forming a majestic armor. The world darkened once again. Countless snake-like lightning continuously shot out from the pygmy king's body, destroying everything in front of him once again. The hurricane quickly retracted in the pygmy king's right hand. The disaster turned into a weapon and slashed down at the ground. Die! Everything in front of the Tempest sword was cleanly torn apart into dust by the hurricane and vacuum. The origin substance within the Tempest caused everything to rapidly corrode and peel off. That was definitely not a simple hurricane. Instead, it was the reappearance of the eternal disaster in the Sea of Lightning. However, compared to the destructive power of the real thing recorded in the present world, this kind of thing that only looked good on the outside was really pitifully weak. Huaisha sighed. Amidst the undead's roar, his figure suddenly appeared on the pygmy king's arm. The bloody light of hatred multiplied in his hand and scattered out. The blade extended from the slash, instantly slicing through the undead's neck. Lightning and rocks were torn apart by the blade. Rotten blood spurted out from the wound, but it was not enough to cut through the undead's head. It only left a cut mark on the undead's hard bones. The undead roared. It raised its other broken arm and pressed it towards Huaisha. Immediately afterwards, however, that figure strangely disappeared into the shadows. The blood-red blade fell from the sky and scattered into countless pitch-black crows. When the crows gathered again, he had already appeared behind the undead. The axe of wrath swept out. The origin substance incarnation galloped over. The blazing bull carried the momentum accumulated over a long distance and the flames of wrath. It crashed into the pygmy king's leg, causing him to fall to the ground. Immediately afterwards, the white deer's phantom appeared in the air. It disappeared in a flash. It had already sliced through the undead's chest, leaving behind a deep wound. Blood spurted out like a waterfall. However, when the undead angrily turned around, wanting to chop that damned thing to pieces, it saw Huaisha standing there, as well as the sword that had appeared in his hand. Brilliant flames brewed on the blade of the sword, bursting forth and soaring into the sky. They turned into a flood that collided with the storm. It tore through the storm like a hot knife through butter, slicing through the lightning and smashing it downwards. It left behind a straight cut from the top of the undead's head to the bottom of the undead's feet. It almost instantly split the undead in half. The undead froze in place. It trembled. It felt the judgment contained within that intense light that targeted all disasters. For a moment, even it thought that it had been destroyed by that sword. However, it soon discovered that it was still whole. The only things that had been torn apart were its regenerated flesh and internal organs. The bones that had been passed down from the pygmy king were not damaged at all. No matter how sharp the sword was, it could not damage the bones that had been forged from lightning and the sea. It could only leave behind a shallow mark. It's useless. It stared in surprise at its bare skeletal hands and complete body. It let out a hoarse laugh. "Ha, it's useless, it's useless." It laughed savagely as it slashed at Huaisha again. "You're not injured at all." Boom. In an instant, Huaisha appeared in front of it, right in front of it. The heavy iron hammer in his hand spat out flames as it smashed down. An incomparable origin substance attack instantly erupted from the undead's soul. It caused the undead's vision to go black. It staggered backwards. It actually fell to the ground once again. What was that damn thing? Bang! The sound of metal rang out from Huaishir's hand. Right, I forgot to ask. Huaishir stepped forward and asked curiously, between pain and regret, which do you prefer? Or do you want both? The outlines of the iron hammer and the long truncheon slowly appeared in his hand, and the metallic light grew stronger. The hammer of pain burned with bloody flames, and the head of Bahamut's malevolent malice on top of Afang's truncheon. The sound of waves surged, and the illusory image of a Kuanping appeared amidst the water vapor and rainbow light. In the instant it appeared, a new storm was stirred up amidst the countless remnants of hell. It was just like a whirlpool. A new tide was stirred up. In that instant, the shadow beneath Huaishir's feet danced and rose up like a surging wave. It rose up, expanded, and enveloped the undead's face. It covered despair. In an instant, the thick water vapor turned into a white fog amidst the mighty whale's song. The attacks from the stone marrow hall once again descended upon the undead's body. Continuous loud noises burst out, like thunder. After overlapping in one place, it formed a mighty melody, mastery, symphony, under the ravaging of both origin substance and matter. The sound of cracking could be heard from the pygmy king's body. The undead screamed in terror, subconsciously trying to protect its face. However, it was unable to block the attacks that continuously descended upon its body. Its pale, white bones trembled violently, and fine cracks actually began to appear. Wait, He wanted to speak, but what appeared before his eyes was only a pair of cold eyes and the truncheon that was smashing down. Under the assault of the violent storm, the skeleton hummed like iron. Immediately after, there was a scalp-numbing sound of breaking. Using the omnipresent water vapor as a medium, Huaishir's power accurately penetrated the pygmy king's body, separating the connective tissues and bones from each other, completely peeling off those rotten and festering tissues. Immediately after, the joints between each bone exploded. First, it was the legs. Next, it was the legs, and then the two spines, as well as the connecting cartilage in the middle, as well as the four spasming arms. It was as if he was destroying a marionette, using pain to suppress the resistance of the soul, and then using regret to destroy the defense of the skeleton. The entire opponent was turned into a pile of mush. When the thick fog dissipated from the storm, only the sound of collapse could be heard. The giant fell to the ground once again. From head to toe, every bone in its body had been completely detached, and it could not move at all. Only viscous blood continuously seeped out from its wounds, scarlet filling the air. It was already on the verge of death. Its solidified soul was already on the verge of collapse. Under the torment of pain, it struggled to make vague sounds, constantly saying something, begging for mercy, but it could not be heard clearly. In front of the giant, in the ruins, Huaishir raised his arm to wipe the sweat on his face, and looked at him. He told him, "Now you can speak." The skeleton was stunned for a long time, as if it finally understood what had happened, and its expression immediately became excited. It did its best to squirm on the ground, moving over little by little. There was no trace of the rage and stubbornness from before, and it was full of taming and desire. "Spare me! Spare me!" He gasped for breath with difficulty, and from the gaps of his teeth, he begged vaguely, "It's all my fault, all my fault. I'm sorry. I'm so audacious. I'm so ungrateful. I shouldn't have stolen your things. Spare me, spare me. As long as you don't kill me, I'll do anything." Huaishir seemed to be stunned, and scratched his head in confusion. "My things?" Yes. Yours. It's all yours. The skeleton tried hard to nod, but could not move, but an unprecedented sincere expression appeared on its rotten face, full of remorse and self-blame. I overestimated myself, did not know the heavens and reason, and dared to offend you. That's why I ended up like this. Please be merciful. I'm willing to sign a slave contract and serve you for eternity. There was no dignity, not even the slightest hesitation. The moment he was sure of his defeat, the skeleton chose to surrender. Even if he was humiliated, it did not matter, as long as he could continue to exist. Huaisha could not bear it. Isn't this too unfair for you? What are you saying? The skeleton opened its single eye wide, full of flattery. It's my honor to be your dog. I'm the only one who doesn't deserve you. How is this unfair? Yes, I still have treasures. I still have a treasury. It's just below here. The key to activate it is in the stone tablet in the center of the settlement. There's also the treasury of 5 eyes. I know where it is. As if he was afraid that Huaisha would not be willing to listen, he ignored his coughing and serious injuries, and quickly spat out a series of locations and activation methods from his mouth. He did not even have any thoughts of using it as a bargaining chip. He was afraid that he would doubt his sincerity. After Huaisha heard this, his eyes moved slightly, and then he felt a little regretful. But our Astronomy Association is a human rights organization. We are not allowed to take in slaves. Then I'll join the Astronomy Association. I'll join. The skeleton seemed to understand something. He was overjoyed and said excitedly, I've heard that organizations in the modern realm like to find cannon fodder and periphery in hell, right? No matter how lowly the position is, there's no problem. Please let me serve you. For a moment, even the people on the sun ship in the distance looked at each other. This was the first time they saw a group leader in hell crying and shouting, wanting to be a slave for the Astronomy Association. Did they make a mistake somewhere? Okay, Huaisha sighed. Since you've said so, I can't refuse you. But are you sure? The rules and regulations of the Astronomy Association are very strict. I'm sure. The skeleton wriggled forward and shouted with all his might, I must have been born to be a dog for the Astronomy Association. Being a dog for the Astronomy Association is the meaning of my existence. If I can't be a dog for the Astronomy Association, then what's the point of my life? In the long silence, under Huaisha's scrutiny, the skeleton showed a fanatical and flattering look. He did not dare to resist in the slightest, allowing the blood to flow, and did not even dare to stop the bleeding. He only trembled. He pleaded for mercy, and mercy from the judge. In the end, Huaisha nodded slowly. Very well, since you have understood reason and shame, and want to redeem your mistakes, then I can give you a chance. He put his palm into his pocket. The skeleton continued to suffocate, staring blankly, for fear that he would pull out a weapon. But when Huaisha raised his hand, there was only a certificate in his hand. Thorns and sharp blades surrounded the emblem of the modern realm, a certificate from the Astronomy Association. Just like that, it was placed in front of him. From today onwards, you are a member of the Astronomy Association. Mr. Skeleton, Huaisha said, cheer for this. You have won a precious redemption. Yes, that's right. Redemption. The skeleton almost cried tears of joy, leaving scarlet tears. Your great kindness, I will engrave it in my heart. I will definitely. Next, as your introducer, I will teach you your first lesson as a member of the Astronomy Association. Huaisha interrupted him and told him calmly, I hope you can learn and listen seriously. Definitely. I will definitely remember it in my heart. The skeleton shouted excitedly. Please tell me. I will definitely remember it in my soul. I will study it in depth every day. I will not dare to slack off. There's no need to be so exaggerated. Huaisha waved his hand a little embarrassedly and smiled. As long as you practice it, it will be fine. At that moment, a clear sound rang out. It broke. In the skeleton's sluggish eyes, Huaishir's arm had already sunk into his chest, clenching something faintly beating in it. Clenching. You must remember it well. Huaishir solemnly instructed. The first lesson as a member of the Astronomy Association, that was sacrifice your heart for the modern realm. At that moment, a torrent of shadowy origin substance emerged from the skeleton's body, erupted, and swallowed everything. Amidst the wails of the skeleton, the door to the ultimate slowly opened. Countless shadows were like hands pulling the wailing skeleton of the giant, dragging it bit by bit into eternal darkness. The mournful screams came to an abrupt end. There was nothing left in the ruins. Only Huaishir looked down at the strange stone heart that was still beating vigorously in his hand. He nodded in satisfaction. Finally, he praised. It seems that you have done it. Chapter 1045. Pitch black smoke rose into the sky. After countless towers broke, the rusty tower forest where the dark clouds had dispersed did not receive a clear sky. Instead, it was shrouded in an even thicker darkness. Scorching hot wind mixed with a pungent smell blew in the sky, rolling up thick smoke and spreading in all directions. The original Skull settlement had already turned into a piece of scorched earth. Now, on the scorched earth, a huge furnace was releasing rolling heat like a pitch-black monster crawling on the ground. The terrifying fire had burned for 2 days and nights. Countless steel birds hovered in the air, rising and falling in flocks. They pulled ropes and threw truckloads of materials into the furnace. In the factory made of huge machinery, roars continuously sounded. The kobolds wearing gas masks were already black from the smoke. They moved in the thick smoke, moving carts of iron ingots that had not yet cooled down from the assembly line and sending them to the processing equipment at the other end. Then, the equipment at the other end spat out the finished products and sent them to the next processing window along the conveyor belt of the assembly line. Smelting, forging, stamping, welding, those huge and crude, ancient models had long been eliminated in the modern realm. Now, they were put to use again in hell. At the end of the assembly line, hundreds of cyborgs were urgently busy. They followed Beelzebub's instructions and hurriedly assembled the large equipment. These cyborgs with goat horns and bleeding were all Gregory's reserve tools. Using the miracle of the golden fleece and the dragon-toothed soldier to smelt, they had a considerable degree of adaptability. Their names were written on scrolls made of wool and gold thread and transcribed with ashes. They were given a secret ritual during the process of their birth. The bodies of morning and evening were just their carriers. After years of use and maintenance, they already had the knowledge and ability to operate alchemy instruments and perform precise operations. Now, under their operation, the originally mighty and ferocious sunship was beyond recognition. It was disassembled again. The outer armor that had been welded was completely dismantled and then melted back into the furnace for reconstruction and maintenance. The hull was also disassembled under the large hoisting equipment. It was like a whale being dissected. All the buildings on the ship were dismantled, the hull was cut open, the deck was overturned, the ship frame was reorganized, and all the equipment and instruments were placed around the ship. Many different cabin structures welcomed a new round of adjustments. All the mainframes, transmission layers, propulsion structures, auxiliary machines, and other equipment were exposed. This is too much. Sob, sob, sob. This is too much. Raymond wiped his tears at the side. Sunship, my sunship. All right, that's enough. The red dragon's avatar was right next to him. It glanced at him from the corner of its eyes. Free modifications and upgrades. I didn't even cry, so why are you crying? At worst, we can just change it back later. That's what I'm crying about. Raymond wiped away his snot and tears, feeling even sadder. Think about it. I still have to change it when I go back. How many F***king loans do I have to pay off? I might even have to be a tool for another 90 years. The thought of having to live another 90 years of a life where people would shoot you with cannons just because you were sitting in a chair was enough to dishearten him. At this moment, along with the high-pitched alarm of the crane, a huge shadow slowly swept across the sky. A huge dragon skeleton covered in iron light slowly descended from the sky under the pull of steel cables, causing a low rumble. That was the skeleton of the Dwarf King. It was a solid material that even the ultimate and alchemy fires could not handle. It was a precious material that had an extremely strong conductivity against all disasters and miracles. The temporary furnace did not have the temperature to completely smelt them, but this did not prevent them from being reused after modification. This was especially true after Huaishur had perfectly disassembled all of the bones. After the continuous reconstruction by Anton and Gregory these days, the skeleton was pieced back together with the recast iron. The interior was inscribed with alchemy arrays as conduction, and then covered with 6 layers of different alloys as protection. What was finally formed was the brand new keel of Sunship. Other than this, some of the nerves and blood vessels were also preserved under Gregory's suggestion. After being processed by alchemy, this part of the material replaced the original composite cables, reducing their need for high-precision chips and instruments. The conduction efficiency was even better than before. After all, it was the former Dwarf King. Even though he had been reborn and had been demoted from his position as the ruler, his corpse still contained many amazing effects. His entire body is a treasure. Forster looked at the position of the furnace and sighed. It has been burning for 2 days, and it can still produce continuously. Isn't it a little too resistant to burning? After all, it is the skeleton of the ruler plus the 4 crown wearers and most of the life force of the rusty pagoda forest. It is not strange. Gregory smacked his lips, only to feel that his mouth was full of the taste of lemon. It was too sour. Who asked him to not only have good materials, but also good tools? With the pure medium of Saint Germain's alchemy fire and the secret apparatus of Helios, even a stone could be squeezed out of oil. Such a good thing, even a great master would be jealous. In the end, Huaishur only used it to make steel, make explosives, and make red bottles. He was so angry that he was about to die. It wasn't that he hadn't thought about tutoring Huaishur, but he hadn't expected that Huaishur's foundation would be so strange. As soon as he left the field of metalworking and origin substances, it was as if he didn't have any talent in other areas at all. And he had relied on his sealing hand and artificing technique to push himself up to this level. He was so biased in these 2 areas that he couldn't even begin to imagine. Just the high-level basic applications of metamorphic chemistry was enough for Gregory to get to the point of cerebral hemorrhage. In the end, he also gave up. This kind of thing really couldn't be forced. Just as the 2 of them were chatting, a roaring sound could be heard in the distance, and a scorching wind once again rose. In the stinky wind, the thick smoke in the sky stirred, combining with the water vapor and sprinkling down a grayish-black rain. When it fell to the ground, it flowed thickly. It was like asphalt, hissing and sizzling. Under the huge curtain, Foster smoked as he looked at the billowing smoke and flames behind the curtain of rain. He couldn't help but let out a long sigh as he thought about everything that they had personally created, a man-made hell and a natural hell. When these 2 things are placed together, it's almost impossible to tell which is more hellish. They're both hells. There's no difference. Gregory thought for a moment, then replied, "However, we can at least choose one of them. Curry-flavored dog poop and dog shit-flavored curry. There's not much to choose from." Forster leaned against the recliner and covered his face with his hat. "I'm going to sleep for a while. Remember to wake me up for dinner. Right? What are we having for dinner? Curry?" In the silence, the sound of snoring came from under the hat. In the darkness, Weischer stood in a hot and humid greenhouse. Under the evergreen settlement, the four walls were inlaid with gray, scale-like bricks. They overlapped with each other, as if this place was already surrounded and enveloped by a giant snake. On the bricks, there were murals from the abyss, describing the endless wars, the existence of the eternal ring, the merciful and cruel mother of nature, and the great achievements of countless Serpent People warriors. The temperature was too humid and hot for humans, but for the Serpent People, it was quite comfortable and pleasant. Standing in it, one could vaguely hear the sound of countless eggs on the ground around them. Under the command of the shamans, the pregnant Serpent People also stood quietly outside with their babies in their arms, not making any sound. "According to your request, everything is ready, Sir Weischer," the elder respectfully reported. "If you have any other needs, you can let me know at any time." "No need, this is enough." Weischer looked around and did not ask for any more auxiliary mystic instruments or tributes. Originally, there should be more blood and offerings here, praying to the eternal ring and asking it to bestow a blessing to strengthen the vitality of the young Serpent People. However, the blessing of the young arbiter of fate did not need to be so troublesome. As long as Weischer was present, it would be enough. It did not even conflict with the Serpent People's transformation ritual, and could even be superimposed. Moreover, he still had the divine mark, Heaven's Inquisition, in his hands. Although he could not use it completely as a medium for the mystic instrument, there was nothing more suitable for the young arbiter of fate's divinity. The only requirement was darkness. Pure darkness, not a single ray of light. Only in this way could the shadow origin substance circulate smoothly. When Weischer pulled out the jade crown, the void of end automatically activated, covering the entire greenhouse. All of the light was extinguished, but unexpectedly, the darkness did not give off a sense of terror. Instead, it gave off a sense of tranquility and serenity. They couldn't help but relax. Even the elder subconsciously yawned, feeling a wave of drowsiness wash over him. He woke up with a start, only to discover that the Serpent People around him had all lowered their eyes at some point. They had all fallen into a light sleep. Weischer slowly walked through the darkness. He took a deep breath, clasped his hands together, and struck the first note. In that moment, the ritual had already begun. Within the darkness, the echoes continued to echo. The continuous sound overlapped with each other, forming a gradually fading rhythm. When Weischer struck the drum a second time, a new wave of energy was poured into the rhythm, causing the dissipating echoes to resonate once more. The faint, low sounds overlapped with each other. In the end, they formed a dreamlike sound, as if an invisible spirit was playing a melody. Amidst the sound of the drum and flute, a distant, indistinct humming began to spread. Within the darkness, Weischer closed his eyes. He began to sing along with the melody. Autumn orchids are willowy, flowers are growing in the hall, green leaves are pure and fragrant. My wife has a beautiful child. Why does she worry? Autumn orchids and thin leaves filled the courtyard. The green leaves interspersed with pure white flowers, their fragrance lingering in the air. My wife is pregnant. Why does she worry? Weischer was singing the Young Arbiter of Fate's chapter from the 9 songs. As the song echoed, he could sense the divinity in his soul begin to move on its own, and it began to show signs of splitting. However, this was not a collapse, but rather a natural phenomenon. It had split in two. After it broke free from his control, it began to move in the darkness, as if it was gathering into a graceful and noble silhouette. Immediately after, when countless miraculous light spots sprinkled down like rain, a low and mellow singing voice rang out from the operation of the divinity, matching Huaishi's singing voice. It was as if the real young arbiter of fate had descended. Autumn orchids are green, green leaves are purple stems. The hall is full of beauties, but suddenly I am the only one, using orchids to refer to children and descendants. It was as if the deceased god had cast a gentle gaze from the distant past to the present, giving his blessings. Under the gaze of the distant gaze, everything was bestowed with the blessings of the young arbiter of fate, the joy of meeting and the sorrow of parting. The divinities of the great arbiter of fate and the young arbiter of fate resonated with each other, showering mercy to hell. After a long time, when the lingering sound of the song had dissipated, the tranquil darkness had also gradually dissipated. Under the faint illumination of the light, all the recipients in the greenhouse realized that the corners of their eyes were wet. They could not help but shed tears. The sound of eggshells cracking could be heard, and more hatchlings broke out of their shells. They lifted their wet noses and sniffed the hot and humid air. There was also the fragrance of the orchids that was gradually dissipating. The sound of chirping was fragmented. It was full of vitality. Chapter 1046. The elder paced back and forth in the greenhouse, holding up the swaddled infant. He discovered that the faint grayish-black color had all faded away, turning into a pure white. Under the blessing of the young master of life, the impure origin substance was purified again after being cleansed by the secret ritual. Even some of the young Nagas that had been slightly deformed had returned to normal. Huaishi himself felt refreshed. The pressure brought on by the continuous battles and the damage to his soul had also disappeared. He had gained a new understanding of his control over divinity. He was ashamed to say this, but this was the first time he had used a blessing ceremony that was common to the young master of life. It was even close to becoming an industry. He had never experienced anything like this before. But when he came back to his senses, he couldn't help but think, if the young master of life's blessing was the same as baptism, then did this mean that he had become the godfather of a few hundred Nagas? In other words, the moment these Nagas were born, they would be considered as non-believers of the Bahamic cult. In his daze, his hand subconsciously trembled, as if he felt a gaze of approval from the abyss. It was so meaningful. Then, a green light flashed above his head. The fleeting light condensed into the shadow of a scale, then disappeared again. What was that? Huaishi raised his head in shock. Before he could see clearly, he heard the sound of kneeling and kowtowing. The greenhouse was dead silent. The Nagas were all prostrated on the ground, piously worshipping. Huaishi almost jumped in fright. What's going on? It's a blessing. Your Excellency, Huaishi. The elder kowtowed in ecstasy, his eyes almost popping out of their sockets as he stared at Huaishi. You have received the favor of the merciful mother of cruelty. The ring of eternity has specially blessed you. Verdant symbol. It was a symbol of nobility among the Nagas, equivalent to the eternal ring's crown bearers. Unless one was the chief of a large settlement, or a warrior who had experienced tens of thousands of battles, it was extremely difficult to receive the favor of a ruler. Then why was it suddenly given to him? Huaishi scratched his head. He only understood half of it. After pondering for a long time, she suddenly realized that she had been given an award for being a midwifery expert in the production team. Was that why the team had given her a certificate of merit? Was this even possible? But since the certificate had already been given, it would be embarrassing for him to reject it. It was an honorary title, and it was better than nothing. Moreover, with this employment fee, he could even get a discount. This was very good. Huaishi left the underground greenhouse after assisting the elders in blessing and praying for the newly born Nagas. On the street outside the gate, Huge lizards were growling in a low voice. Boxes and packages of various sizes were hanging on their bodies. In the settlement, everyone was hurrying to pack their things. A noisy convoy was gradually taking shape. After the transformation ritual and the blessing of the young arbiter of life, the evergreen settlement was about to embark on the long journey of migration. Under the protection of the female serpent men, all the hatchlings and young serpent men were carefully escorted to the rear of the convoy. Huaisher's blessing had greatly reduced the pressure on their migration. After all, compared to hatchlings, eggs that had not yet hatched were the most fragile. Perhaps they would die prematurely under the bumpy journey and the drastic temperature difference. The first convoy to explore the path had already set off yesterday. In addition to the serpent men hired by Huaisher, the next large group would also set off in the next few days. They're leaving already? Huaisher looked at the flying dust. That's fast. In a few months, the tax collectors and legions of the fallen country will arrive. The elder said, "It will be difficult for us to bear the harsh blood tax alone." Since it was called blood tax, it was not something as gentle and bright as blood donation. Every once in a while, the legions from the fallen country would periodically sweep and patrol the areas within their reach. Depending on the situation and location, the cycle was uncertain. It could be 100 years, 10 years, or a few months. The settlements they passed only had two choices. They could either respectfully submit and pay taxes, or they could overestimate themselves and face destruction. Unless it was a harsh area that was difficult to survive, it would be difficult to escape. But even in hell, it was considered a harsh place, so there must be some terrifying thing or remnant of a disaster entrenched there. If they wanted to survive, they could only submit to the stronger ones. It was not just the Withered King. The other larger and more powerful rulers also had their own territories and regular taxes. The Sea of Thunder needed a large number of slaves to work endlessly for them. The Dragon of Decay would regularly collect aberrations. The Land of Bliss was even more direct. Wherever they passed, not a single blade of grass would grow. Everything was used to satisfy the hunger of the eternal God. In comparison, the Withered King was already considered a rare benevolence. He only wanted blood. More accurately, he wanted life. He wanted to offer his life to the country that represented death. Wherever the legions of the fallen country went, the calculating tax collectors would set a fixed standard for continuous collection based on the local situation. The best treatment was that they would only collect 3 out of 10 taxes. Apart from this, the most common method was to give away half of their lives. Maybe I have some talents that aren't very good, but I can use them without any scruples here. I don't have to worry about hurting the people I care about and want to protect, causing irreparable consequences. Perhaps this is my dark side. Even the dark side is very solemn. Professor Anton sighed. Huaisher smiled. The word solemn shouldn't be used to describe such a cruel and cold thing. If it's something that should be done, then do it. Solemnity and seriousness are better than frivolity and perfunctory. Besides, we're not here for a charity event. Professor Anton replied calmly. Alchemists always say that miracles and disasters are equivalent, but I think that mercy and cruelty may also be the same. No one can be perfect. Huaisher, you don't need to feel any pressure because of this. Huaisher was stunned for a long time after hearing this. To be honest, I thought Professor Anton would blame me. Why would I blame you? The old professor was puzzled. You didn't do anything wrong. Hearing your assurance, I feel a lot more relaxed. Huaisher breathed a sigh of relief and closed his eyes. It seems that I can sleep well tonight. No, you can't. Professor Anton had already put on his external walking equipment. He turned around and stuffed a lot of things into Lucien's hands. Take these things. You have to come and work for me. What? Huaishur was stunned. The internal stress of this batch of finished parts is a bit high. You have to eliminate it. Among the models marked here, there are a lot of unqualified parts that need to be melted down and reworked. Time is a bit tight. I'll give you 2 hours to finish it. Huaishur tried to shirk the work. If alchemy can solve the problem, can't you find Gregory? Alchemists do everything based on their feelings. He has already broken 2 batches of crystal plates. This is the last batch. Don't you worry? Anton glanced at him and said seriously, if you ask me, this is your dark side, Mr. Huaishur. You have to learn to say no to laziness. A real man never needs to rest. And Huaishur was still holding on to the slightest hope. And the lathe's cutter head is broken. You have to make a set of cutter heads first. Anton urged, don't dawdle. I need it urgently. In silence, Huaishur looked at the mountainous pile of work in front of him. He began to think. Was it too late for him to implement an 8-hour workday in hell? Thanks to the Pygmy Kings remains rewarded by old undead iron. The progress of the sun ship's modification had been greatly improved, saving Huaishur and the others a lot of work. Pure, natural, pollution-free, it could be used directly after being modified. It also filled in the gaps of a large number of materials. At the same time, it also gave Anton and Gregory the leeway to further display their abilities. When the sun ship was assembled again, it had become a huge monster that even the workshop could not accommodate. The huge outline supported by the Pygmy King's bones was covered with thick armor. Its edges and corners were fierce. Compared to its original size, it had more than doubled. Just like a sleeping steel monster, just crawling on the ground, it was like a pitch-black mountain range. And in the middle of the ship's hull, the hanging kobold was spitting out the symbol and emblem of the ivory tower bit by bit. This time, it was not only the armor that was renewed, but also the main battle weapon that was crucial to the warship was added. Under the pull of the steel cable, the pitch-black cannon body that was almost as long as the sun ship was still being slowly and carefully lifted. The 2-meter-wide cannon muzzle was enshrouded in darkness, and a jaw-dropping sense of violence assaulted them. Countless cables modified from the Pygmy King's blood vessels were wrapped around it and sank into the steel. They slowly squirmed like living creatures, gradually lighting up the alchemy array. After 4 tests, and confirming that the connection was complete and that all the arrays and instruments were operating normally, everyone in the observation room could not help but cheer. Unfortunately, due to the scarcity of energy, they could not fire a goddamn cannon to celebrate. There was also no big toy for them to blow up. Suddenly, there was no such feeling, but it still feels a little empty. Huaishur walked around the wide deck twice. He felt that compared to the standards of the Abyss Development Bureau, the current firepower was still not enough. Should we get a few more close-range cannons? Or just add 2 more auxiliary cannons? No, we don't have enough equipment. Professor, Anton shook his head. I've calculated the load capacity of the Red Dragon. Now, just the origin deflection shield alone takes up most of the computing resources. The fire control radar's chipset is too outdated. Also, the flight control system is still the same version as the Car of Destiny. It can't support more expansion interfaces. This was only the most important part now. It could not be helped. They lacked everything. There was almost no damage monitoring, and emergency repairs were basically done by hand. A complete sun ship's conventional combat form required at least dozens of crew members to divide the work and coordinate. Now, it was basically controlled by Beelzebub and Huaishur's large group. Radar, fire control, power, communication, Every one of them was a bottomless pit of resources. I can think of a way to solve the firepower part. Professor Anton sighed. But before solving the problem of the components, the modification progress can only be like this. A transit station? Weisher understood. In hell, other than the unreachable supply base, there was actually another place that could solve their urgent problems. An institution left behind from the utopia. Due to the deep backflow and the hasty retreat, a large number of equipment and instruments were abandoned in various hells. There was no lack of precious materials among them. Even if they were only recovered, disassembled, and reused, it could greatly enhance Sunship's compatibility. After some calculations, Forster had already planned a new route. This was their next destination. Depth 51, Samara's third communication center. And before that, it was time to deal with the most important spoils of war. In the silence, everyone looked at the iron box on the table. The last remains of the Dwarf King, the heart of rock iron. Chapter 1047. The four sides of the metal box were engraved with mysterious symbols, and the rope of sorrow was still wrapped around it. Wisps of black smoke and sparks continuously floated out from the gaps between the chains, making the entire item appear both sinister and strange, as if it was a box of disaster that imprisoned a demon. In reality, it wasn't that far off. After Gregory had set up layers of defenses, Weisher carefully unlocked the rope of sorrow. The moment the origin substance armor was unlocked, the dozens of mysterious symbols on the metal box began to shatter one after another. Immediately afterwards, everyone felt a wave of confusion wash over them. It was hard to breathe. This was the origin substance that had undergone a qualitative change after being tempered by the Sea of Thunder. It contained the power of destruction and calamity. The heart was beating. However, every time the heart in the box pulsed, everyone felt as if their hearts were about to stop beating for a moment. In just a few short days, the seal that was enough to imprison the person wearing the crown was about to completely collapse under the suppression of the steel and crystal. The rock iron heart continued to pulsate. The sound of friction was loud and clear, and sparks flew everywhere. Even just looking at it would cause one to feel dizzy. Their souls trembled in fear. Out of everyone present, the only one who wasn't affected was probably Weisher, who had undergone a qualitative change. Its pulsation was unable to extract his soul at all. On the contrary, the pure light of origin substance was able to restrain the power that had been born after the solidification. After a short period of observation, Weisher sensed that something wasn't right. He moved closer. He squinted his eyes and examined it. There was actually a small crack in the right side of the heart. "What is this?" Weisher asked. "It seems to be damaged." "That's normal. The reason this heart has been able to survive for so long is because it has been constantly extracting life force from the rusty tower to support itself during its dormant period," Gregory concluded. "Right now, it has already been awakened. As long as it continues to pulsate, it will passively extract origin substance and life force from within 100 kilometers to repair itself. This is the Gnome King's instinct. Our sealing and suppression won't be able to stop it. Instead, it will cause it to be consumed even faster while resisting the sealing. There's no way for it to be preserved for long, and the mysterious symbols connected to it will also be completely destroyed. Then what should we do?" Weisher scratched his head. "It's a disaster if we let it out, but it's also a hot potato if we keep it. If you can't use it, no matter how powerful you are still trash. Actually, it's very simple to apply it." Gregory suggested, "Just let it return to its own body. Just find a place to stuff it in." In a brief moment of silence, everyone looked at each other. In the end, they all looked behind them at the same time. Raymond was engrossed in his meal. Inside the rice bowl, Raymond felt the temperature of the air suddenly drop, as if something was wrong. He raised his head blankly and saw a few pairs of eyes glowing with a strange light. Subconsciously, he shuddered. Hey, why is everyone looking at me? He scratched his head and was amused by his own guess. It's impossible to stuff such a big toy in my place, right? It'll break. Ha, ha, ha. In the long silence, Raymond laughed until he couldn't laugh anymore. His smile gradually disappeared. F***CK, are you guys serious? He subconsciously shrank back a little, wanting to find a place to run, but Forster, who had appeared behind him at some point, had already pressed down on his shoulder. It was like an iron clamp. Good things. The chief engineer comforted him. It's all good things, isn't it? Because you don't have this thing, so I want to make it up to you? Gregory, who was eating melon seeds at the side, advised, it's always right to make up for whatever you lack. Besides, other than you, no one else is suitable. Weisher spread his hands. Why don't you do it yourself? Raymond widened his eyes and said in a trembling voice, isn't your ultimate quite good at pretending to? You still have a celestial fault. The core of the ultimate is not connecting the inside and outside, but sealing it. Even if it can be put in, this thing is useless and can only be refined into a pile of scrap metal. Weisher explained, the compatibility rate between the celestial fault and the dwarf king's heart is not high, and there is still space left for the Nautilus. Besides, I don't have any experience, do I? I have to find something to try my hand at. Then you should find someone else. Raymond was horrified. Why are you looking for me? Aren't we familiar with each other? Weisher gave a simple and honest smile. This is such a good opportunity. We can't let others take advantage of it, right? In this chilling silence, he instinctively looked at the only conscience in the team, but after Professor Anton noticed his pleading gaze, he was silent for a long time, wanting to say something but hesitating. In the end, he looked away awkwardly. He also felt that this arrangement was quite good. What about you? Raymond looked at the sun ship with his only hope. Why aren't you F***Kings saying anything? The red dragon moved back a little and pretended not to hear anything. It could not say that it was the one who suggested this from the beginning. Right. You have to accept this reality. Weisher comforted him. Think about it carefully. Isn't it quite good? This was the straw that broke the camel's back. Tears finally rushed out. In fact, Weisher's arrangement was not purely out of persecution. Well, at least 60% of it was not out of persecution. Instead, it was because Raymond was too suitable. To put it simply, this was just a heart transplant. If it were anyone else, they would have to undergo a removal surgery. However, Raymond did not need it at all. He did not have this thing decades ago. The stone heart that the Eye of Nightmare was responsible for transporting to the ruler, Eve lit, was a precious essence nurtured by the mountains. It could heal all wounds. However, there was only one stone heart. Raymond and the red dragon had two. If one was saved, the other would have to die. Raymond chose to leave the future to his friends. When the red dragon brought him to the ivory tower, his body had already been completely eaten up by the rancher's curse. The transformation of the Eternal Road's stigmata saved his life, but at the same time, he and the red dragon could share the same life under the connection of the stigmata. It happened to be the opposite of the other ascendants of the Eternal Road. He had become an accessory of the car of destiny. Now, a chance to save all of this was finally in front of the red dragon. It could not say, no, because after I install it, Raymond will become at least 6 meters tall, and it will be even more difficult to find a girlfriend in the future and reject it, right? Why would he want a woman? A real driver never needed that kind of thing. Women will only affect our driving speed. As long as I drive fast enough, my girlfriend won't be able to catch up to me. It was decided. Come, I'll hold his hand for you. Hurry up. 2 hours later, the Crimson Dragon's armored arm pulled its driver over and pinned Redmond, who was still struggling and crying, onto the operating table. Then, Weisher skillfully covered Redmond's face with gauze that was soaked in tranquilizer. Afraid that it would not be effective enough, he added a lot of his own poisons and curses. Soon, Raymond's eyes turned white, and he gradually lost his strength. Before he completely lost consciousness, accompanied by the illusion of countless girls waving goodbye to him, the last thing he heard was Weisher's crazy laughter and the roar of a spinning chainsaw. 2 days later, at noon, endless yellow sand flowed. Silently in the scorching hot air, and burning ashes slowly fell from the sky. And in this dead and desolate world, a huge door slowly opened. A passage from the depths of the abyss opened, and a tide-like army instantly covered the entire land. In the sky, strange birds spread their wings and gathered into an overwhelming dark cloud. The army from the fallen country majestically marched into the world. But when he looked around, there was nothing in the vast expanse of yellow sand. It was empty, only desolation and death. Wrong place. The vanguard at the front, the solidifier, frowned and suddenly pulled the hunched navigator up. His 5 fingers tightened. You bunch of trash, you can't even find the wrong place. No, I didn't. Under the tattered gray robe, the navigator waved his 3 arms with difficulty and squeezed out a hoarse voice. I swear, I didn't find the wrong place. The tree map shows this place. This is it. You're telling me that this is the Rusty Tower Forest. The solidifier's face pulled up into a sinister smile. Are you kidding? Or is my brain muddled? And I can't tell the difference between this broken sand and the tower? I don't know. I really don't know. The navigator cried. Xing Chen's instructions can't be wrong. We've already arrived at the designated place. It shouldn't be like this. It shouldn't be like this. Crack. With a crisp sound, the struggling navigator's body suddenly tensed up. Then, like a puppet that had lost its strings, it collapsed and stopped moving. The solidifier coldly threw the rotten meat in his hand on the ground. The snake crawling on the ground was already unable to endure the hunger and thirst, and instantly pounced on it. Soon, only a patch of rapidly drying blood was left on the yellow sand, and there was no trace left. The solidifier turned around and respectfully came to the side of the chariot and reported in a low voice, "Lord Hades, please give me a little more time." No need. Behind the curtains of the chariot, Hades stood up and lifted the curtains. He looked at the dead world in front of him, and his expression gradually turned cold. We didn't go to the wrong place. He said, "This is the Rusty Tower Forest. There is no mistake." As if to prove his words, the scorching wind swept up the dust and sand that covered the sky and earth, revealing the ruins that were buried underneath. The collapsed tower was like quartzite that had been weathered for thousands of years. The moment it was touched, it collapsed into a patch of gray sand. In the dead silence, no one spoke. Only the sound of the wind blowing through the world that had died once again was loud and shrill, as if mocking laughter from afar. Are you warning me? Why, sure. Are you showing off your power? Hades bent down and pinched the scattered yellow sand in his hand. His expression was gloomy and curious. Or are you trying to hide something? He pondered in silence. He felt as if he had finally grasped something. In this abyss, what was it that made a person of the realm so reluctant to part with it? It seemed that more clues were needed. After a short moment of silence, he slowly grinned, revealing a strange smile. The blessed land, the corrupt order, the purgatory workshop master, and those guys who were beaten so badly by celestial genealogy that they couldn't raise their heads, finally informed the Golden Dawn. Didn't they want to pay back? Hades looked down at the dust on the ground that looked like ashes and smiled coldly. Now it's time. Chapter 1048. All myths and legends had a crucial link to the creation of the world. The source codices of all lineages also had this crucial part. It would determine the composition of the stigmata and the foundation of miracles, as well as how to understand all things, whether it was the sleeping gods, the gods wielding axes, the existences moving on the surface of the water, or the giants sucking the milk of cows in the cold winter. In essence, they were all describing the process of all things flowing out from the pillar of divine essence. No matter which one it was, the process was not much different. In the chaos, a power appeared. After breaking everything, the clean rose and the turbid fell, forming a magnificent world of the reality. All things operated in an orderly manner, but many myths did not mention it. In fact, it was the same for the destruction of the world. It was not much different from when all of this was created. When all things came to their final end, everything that had been sublimated would be solidified and destroyed in hell, and the huge reality would be torn apart. When countless fragments fell into the abyss, the so-called hell would be formed. Those light, empty, and insignificant things would gradually peel off and float in the shallow water, while the miracles that solidified into disasters would fall into the deep ocean. Even deeper, the pure and more glorious something was, the heavier it would be after solidifying, and the further it would fall. It was because of this that the concept of depth was formed, as well as the general division. Humans used the quality of disasters or miracles as a yardstick to measure the abyss formed by the endless hell, the deep zone, the withered zone, the dark zone, the quiet zone, and even the many strange bottom of the abyss, and at the top, the place of eternal light surrounded by countless shattered borders, the reality. After unifying all of these existences, the entire world was the most real and complete appearance. Once during the most prosperous period of the utopia, when the development of hell was the most popular, the places where human footprints were spread out were the existence of the deep zone today. The Bronze Eye clearly divided the many hells by depth, discovering countless ruins, relics, large groups of hells, and even barren domains. At the same time, all outposts and exploration bases were built in this deep zone. But in fact, if understood in the way of oceanography, all of this was just the upper layer of the sea of hell. The shallow zone, this was where the light of reality shone. At the same time, it was also the place with the most remaining life force and life. Countless large groups of life wandered, grew, killed, and died in this barren hell. However, they were unable to provide for the survival of true predators and behemoths. In the withering zones, however, there was no longer such a gentle environment. The dark abyss, the land of bliss, amidst the eternal hymns and praises, the great light from God's throne shone on all things. Fanatical believers with wings on their backs gathered into a formation with no end in sight. After passing through layers of palaces, they stepped on the steps of sacrifice and walked towards the door of an audience. Above the vault of heaven, countless holy angels flew and danced, with pure smiles on their faces, sincerely praising this pure and noble faith, the only truth and essence in this world. And when the resounding bell rang like the bell before a meal, the archangel in the clouds held a bright golden scroll and descended on the ground. Countless hunting angels prostrated on the ground, respectfully receiving the decree from the great existence beside God. Under the throne, those holy spirits who listened to the teachings day and night and served the only ruler of this world, drafted the latest offering and sacrifice. So, under the gaze of tens of thousands, the archangel opened the 6th supplement of today's fixed food menu in his hand and made an impassioned announcement. The appetizer, 10,000 believers, 16 solidifiers, 1 priest, 6 large groups. 2 furnaces, fry until slightly yellow, grill with crystal charcoal, Thin salt and fat should not be too much. After the first scroll was handed over, the recipient left with tears of gratitude. Then, the second, the third, and the fourth. A total of 2 soups, 1 main dish, 2 side dishes. Finally, the dessert needed 1 celestial genealogy member. Why, sure. The archangel solemnly handed over the order in his hand to the subordinate in front of him. Don't let the Holy Lord wait too long. Praise the Lord. Praise the great King. The king of the legion who received the order was moved to tears, holding the scroll with both hands, and solemnly promised, I will offer the Lord a clean meal. Very good, go. The archangel nodded with satisfaction. Behind them, the door of the blessed land opened with a loud bang. Then countless hunting angels roared out, turning into a torrent and rushing in all directions. Once again, it enveloped the entire abyss. What is this? In the dark abyss, the land of bliss, a surprised voice came from the palace that was filled with moans and wails. On a gorgeous throne inlaid with jewels and beautiful jade, a man covered in a layer of gauze covered his mouth and screamed in surprise. What is this? What is this? The archbishop of the corrupt order, the ruler under Boishuan, who was known as the host of the banquet, had stars of longing and joy in his eyes at this moment. He hugged his chest with his hands and moaned excitedly, where did this little flower come from? It's so lovable. Right in front of him, the monsters kneeling on the ground held up the scroll in their hands, showing him the images sent by the jesters. The priest in yellow pointed at the figure in the middle and introduced, Huaisher, male, 18 years old. Oh, it's a delicate flower. The host of the banquet shouted in surprise. Behind him, the strange mummies that were immersed in desire and revelry cheered in unison, delicate flower. It needs patient care. The host of the banquet emphasized solemnly. So the mummies roared, care? The priest was stunned and hesitated. But the jesters are, I don't care about the F** king reward. The host of the banquet sneered. A bunch of unromantic dead ghosts. How would they know what love is? The mummies roared, make love. I like him very much. The host of the banquet sucked his fingers and stroked the figure on the scroll in a daze. Go, bring him to me. Beauty is only worthy of the strong. Yes, the mummies praised fervently. In an instant, dozens of priests prostrated on the ground and promised solemnly, yes. Just as the priests were about to leave after receiving the order, they were suddenly called back. There's more. The host of the banquet pointed at the scroll and said, forget about the remaining 3 old dishes. Bring back the one next to them, too. He paused for a moment and carefully studied the truck driver's sluggish face. He nodded slightly. It's a bit ugly, but it has a unique flavor. It can be used as a side dish after the big meal. The mummies raised their arms and shouted excitedly, side dish. Soon, the door closed again. From the palace, the never-ending revelry began once again. At the same time, in the depths of hell, in the thick fog that was filled with strange precipitation, sewage flowed. Countless shriveled corpses floated in the sewage. A pitch-black factory was constantly rumbling, producing day and night. Countless chimneys that pierced into the sky like a forest spewed out an endless stream of thick smoke. However, as the signal from afar arrived, the factory rumbled and shrank strangely, quickly turning into an incomparably huge fortress. The foundation of the fortress rose rapidly, and strange metal legs grew out. Together with the caterpillar tracks, it gradually disappeared into the distance amidst the rumbling. In the center of the fortress, under the symbol of the Purgatory Workshop owner, a brand new number appeared. Number 77. Today, the silent workshop owners joined the hunt. It wasn't only here, it wasn't even limited to the Golden Dawn, the Blessed Land, or any other place, under the push of the jesters, whether it was the wandering dwarves in the Thunder Sea, the workshop owners hidden in various parts of the dark abyss, or the survivors who had fallen apart under the ravages of celestial genealogy. At this moment, all of them looked at the boundary between the deep zone and the withering zone with malice in their hearts. An existence named Why Sure. Deep Zone 51 Dust Wasteland. In the never-ending gray storm, the pitch-black sun ship rumbled forward, crushing the sharp stone pieces that were like thorns. Sparks flew everywhere. The rocks mixed in with the storm were like sharp blades, constantly scraping against the origin barrier. However, very quickly, under the guidance of the deflection field, the rocks flew behind the barrier like fish caught in an undercurrent, disappearing without a trace. Isn't this very fast? On the bridge, Why Sure praised, in just a short day and a half, we have already crossed 4 hells. At this speed, we will reach the 3rd communication center in 2 days. The premise is that no one blocks the way, Raymond reminded weakly. Now, he was leaning on his enlarged version of the captain's seat, like a giant bear being forced into a baby carriage. Now, this guy's height had swelled to 2 meters, and it was still growing at a rate of at least 10 centimeters per day, according to Gregory's estimation. The results of the surgery were quite satisfactory. When Raymond and the Rock Iron Heart were completely fused, his height should be fixed at around 9 meters. At this moment, after crying, throwing a tantrum, and hanging himself, he had already accepted reality in despair and said goodbye to his wives, who had never existed and might never exist in the future. He had even entered the stage of, "Isn't this pretty good?" It was indeed pretty good. However, when he spoke, his voice was still weak, and there was a trace of sadness in it. "If I were a jester of the abyss, I would definitely not let you go. That kind of thing, what are you worried about?" Why Sure calmly cracked the melon seeds that he stole from Gregory and spat them all over the ground. "We are running so fast, he won't be able to catch up for a while. Besides, hell is so big, can a person jump out of the wilderness and slash me?" Before he finished speaking, everyone's face in the bridge had already turned green. "You better shut your crow's mouth. Are we teammates? Why do you want to stick the flag into a dead end?" After fully experiencing Why Sure's ability to walk backward, they no longer dared to doubt the mysterious power of the East. But this time, before they had time to pounce on Why Sure and cover his mouth, a piercing alarm sounded. The radar was screaming in a high-pitched voice. The unknown disaster reaction was close at hand. Immediately afterward, an unfamiliar voice sounded from the bridge. "Excuse me, is Mr. Why Sure here?" It was mainly active in deep water and could be seen almost anywhere with water. It fed on moss and had amazing endurance. More than 10 years of drought could only make it dehydrated and hibernate. But after 2 drops of water, it could jump up and down again. And more importantly, it could be eaten. As long as it was dried, the toxicity and precipitates would be discharged along with the body fluids. The meat was quite chewy. It was ranked 4th in the hell recipes launched by Why Sure and was the most common source of meat. And the grayish-white shell could be ground into powder to make nutrient drinks for new sublimators during their recovery period. A snail was talking to him? Why Sure scratched his head. What kind of illusion was this? "Yes, that's right. It's me. I'm a snail." The voice said, "Let me introduce myself, Mr. Why Sure. My name is Odom. You may be wary of me, but after seeing this, you should dispel your doubts." Ugh, accompanied by a muffled groan. The snail squirmed on the ground as if it was trying hard. But after squirming for a long time, it was deflated. "Sorry, can you give me some water?" Odom said, "This body has been thirsty for too long and has no strength." In the silence, Huaishur took out a bottle of water from the ultimate with trembling hands. "It's for you." "No, it's too miserable. This guy is too miserable. He couldn't take it anymore." He originally thought that such a stealthy appearance was a terrifying enemy or a hero in the abyss, but he didn't expect it to be an edible snail that was almost crushed to death. Was this hell? Wasn't it too bizarre? After drinking a bottle of water, the snail seemed to have been pumped with air as it grew. Soon, the limbs outside the shell swelled rapidly. Then, like vomiting, it spat out a piece of sticky and shiny metal from its mouth. On the front of the iron plate was the emblem of the Utopia, and on the back was the emblem of a black whale. At this moment, it was emitting the same origin-substance fluctuations as the snail in front of him. To be precise, it was ridiculous that a snail could emit origin-substance fluctuations. Moreover, according to the certificate, it was actually a subordinate member of the Utopia's hell. It had been granted a position and establishment, and it was an official employee unlike the cannon fodder of the undead. Now, in front of Huaishur was a black whale. In the former research institute of the Utopia, most of the members who were active in the depths were named after animals. Among them, not to mention the armed researchers, the white doves, the red deer, a merchant who wandered between hell to obtain resources for the ivory tower, and the gray stork, an agent who had disguised himself as a creature of hell to carry out secret missions in hell. And the last, the black whale, was simply the leader of a large group in hell. He was a local through and through. Let me introduce myself again. Although he was the leader of a large group, the rust snail was too harmless. The Republic did not have any expectations for his combat ability. He basically acted as an intelligence source for the Republic and regularly reported what he had spied on through the rust snails. He did not ask for anything in return, nor did he want to use this to obtain anything. He was the kind of volunteer who worked for free. In any case, he had nothing to do. As long as the rust snail was not completely extinct, there was no possibility of it dying. In the entire deep zone, there were always one or two of them, wherever there was water. Moreover, they laid tens of thousands of eggs at once. They were resistant, durable, and tenacious, although they were so small that almost no one cared about them, and they most often appeared in pots and dining tables. Their tenacious vitality still continued. Even hell could not erase them. In this long and endless life, if one did not want to completely degenerate into an ignorant beast or be driven crazy by boredom and dullness, one had to find some entertainment for themselves. And for more than 100 years, the biggest entertainment in hell was probably celestial genealogy. Later on, after the Republic was gone, he was not affected much. He lazed around for decades until Russell contacted him again and entrusted him with the job of a guide. His instincts told him that there would be new entertainment this time. Sure enough, celestial genealogy had never disappointed the snail when it came to causing trouble. Even if there was an accident midway, he could always sense the traces of Huaishur and the others through the rust snail's perception. After the crash, not only did these guys not suffer any setbacks, but they were like bandits who had broken out of prison and wild dogs that had escaped from their leash, setting off a bloody storm in hell. And now, because of Huaishur's existence, the entire deep zone and the withering boundary were in chaos. Well, although it had always been chaotic, this time there was finally order amidst the chaos. At the critical juncture of the impending War of the Worlds, a new storm was brewing once again. Relying on the enmity with the old seniors, as well as Huaishur's own actions, the destruction of the Republic, the blessed land, the corrupt order, the Sea of Lightning, the infernal workshop master, the Human Exhibition Bureau, the hunting group, the Children of Apocalypse, the solidifiers that wandered between the various hells. In total, There were more than 16 organizations, more than 30 crowns, 70 to 80 legions, hundreds of large groups, and all kinds of messy characters began to rapidly appear, approaching this area at an unprecedented speed. There were only 3 things that everyone wanted to do here. Why sure, and it was still why sure. The last time I saw someone get messed up like this, it was Chuhai before he became a natural enemy. Speaking of this, Odom could not help but be overjoyed. Just thinking of such a good, cough, such a dangerous thing, I couldn't help but rush over. For some reason, Hwai sure smelled a terrible aura from his guide. The aura of a fun-loving person. You're just here to watch the show. You're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.